I'm Travis from Scorpion 4x4 and Off-Road here in Las Vegas. Today we're going to be actually working on a 1980 CJ7. It has a Dana 60 front axle, and we're going to be showing you how to install the Yukon hardcore locking hub set from Yukon Gear. Everything that is going to be coming in the kit, pre-boxed. It's going to include all your requirements for the locking assembly and all the replacement parts, return springs. It's a very well laid out kit. It's going to come also with your instructions and everything in case you haven't done it before. So first thing, we're going to go ahead and make sure that all the products are correct, and our application that we're working on is correct, and lay all the parts out here for you. Again, this is actually for both sides, so it comes as a complete set. All the snap rings, spacers, new hardware is all included. Comes all pre-packaged, vacuum sealed. That way no moisture or anything can obviously get into it. Now when actually installing the components, you want to actually pre-grease all of the components. So I lay everything out, pre-grease everything right before we go into assembly, and we'll actually show that here in a few minutes. To complete this job today, we're actually going to be using a couple of basic hand tools. Snap ring pliers for the snap rings, a Torx T25, which we're actually going to be needing to remove the stock hub assemblies, and a couple of smaller screwdrivers. What I like to do at this time now is actually lay all the components out in the order that they will be installed, and then I can also prep each of the components with a small amount of grease. You want to get a liberal amount of grease on all the components that are obviously going to be in mesh with one another to prevent any premature wear. Now at this time, we can go ahead and move over to the vehicle and start with disassembly and installation of the new hardcore Yukon locking hub set. Now that we're over here to the vehicle, what we're going to do is we're going to start by removing the old locking hub unit off of the hub assembly. This particular application actually has a T25 screw. There's 6 of them. We want to start by removing all 6. And once you have all of these bolts removed, the cap will actually come right off, or should come off, I should say. This will actually access the snap ring on the inner and the outer bore, which will be removed so we can remove this unit. There's the inner, and the outer is actually accessed by using a small screwdriver, flathead, and by getting just underneath the ear, you can walk that snap ring right out. And there's the outer. Now we're ready to actually take the inner unit out of the hub bore, what I like to do is actually take two of the screws that held the cap on, screw it back into the assembly. What you can do is actually just wiggle the whole unit right out. And there it is. Now with the whole unit removed, you can actually see inside the hub. Obviously at this time you'll actually want to inspect any of the components, or if you're going to be doing wheel bearings or replacing wheel bearings or servicing the wheel bearings, now would all actually be a good time to do that. But before we actually reinstall the hardcore locking set of Yukons, what we want to do is actually get all that old grease off of the splines and out of the unit itself so we can re-grease it with some nice clean grease. Also inspect the snap ring grooves, make sure there's no damage. What we also want to do is go ahead and take a little bit of grease. We want to grease this inner hub. So if we do get any moisture in there, we obviously will not be having any corrosion starting. With that completed, we're actually ready for assembly. First component we're going to start with is our spring retainer. This is going to go all the way in and made up to the surface. And sit right up next to our bearing. Now there's a keyway inside that you want to make sure actually sits in so it's completely seated. Next, we're going to install the spring. Also apply a little bit of grease to the coil spring also. Any bare components that are obviously left in there and are not coated can actually, rust. When you're installing the spring can actually go either direction. So either end can go in first. I want to push it all the way in, seat it up next to the retainer. Now with the spring installed, next component is going to be the axle spacer, which will slide right over the axle. Make sure it's fully seated. You want to make sure that you apply a liberal amount of grease to that spacer, so it will actually ride right up against your spindle. Next, we're going to have the driver and the coupler. We want to mesh them both together. Then we can go ahead and install it next. It may be necessary to actually spin the hub to get them lined up. And while still holding pressure against the assembly, you can install the snap ring over the axle. Make sure the snap ring is fully seated before you actually release. the driver and coupler. Now it should move freely. You can push against it. Should return all the way up to the snap ring. Next we'll install the cam spacer and the retainer plate. Simply align the ears with the cam spacer. Pull it through the retainer plate. It can also go on either way. Now while applying force against the spring, we're going to be installing our outer snap ring. Simply pull the snap ring apart and you're going to walk it into the groove while applying pressure. Against the retainer plate. Again, check and make sure that the snap ring is fully seated, and also that the snap ring does not interfere with the holes in the retainer. That way when we bolt our selector and our bezel on, we won't have interference with the outer bolts. Now with the selector and the bezel, we've already pre-greased the O-rings. What you want to do at this point is actually point it towards the lock, and on the back side you'll actually see where the ears will line up. So that way when we go to bolt it on, everything will line up with all the bolt holes lining up. Last, what we're going to do is actually simply install the 6 bolts onto the outside. Now if you plan on taking this hub assembly apart in the near future, you can go ahead and assemble the unit with all 6 bolts. Now if you don't plan on taking the assembly apart, it is a good idea to put a drop of Loctite on your bolts. In this instance, we're actually going to be servicing the front end in the near future, so we're not going to use Loctite at this time. After properly torquing these down to 22 inch-pounds, we will then make sure that it locks, unlocks, and the application works properly. After torquing our bolts, we want to check for proper operation. With it in the lock position, we'll go ahead and we'll spin the hub assembly. At this time, it's locked in, spinning our axle. We can see the front drive line spinning. Then what we'll do to check for our proper unlock is we'll actually put it in the free position and we'll spin it again. At this point, it's spinning freely. That noise we're actually hearing is this brake pad shifting around. It should be quiet. There not should be any ratcheting noises or any kind of noises that you'll be hearing. If you do, and it's coming from inside the unit, you'll want to take it all back out and check for proper installation of all the components on the inside. Maybe something was installed incorrectly, or the hub is not fully disengaging. We can lock it back in. Locks right away. Front driveline starts spinning. Again, we can unlock it. Disengages. That completes our installation. Obviously, we're going to go ahead and we'll do the same thing for the driver's side. Again, my name is Travis from Scorpion Four-Wheel Drive and Off-Road here in Las Vegas. And this was the installation on the Yukon Dana 60 Hardcore locking hub set.